Get out. And don't ever come back." The words hit harder than the slap across Ilara's face. The fire from the hearth crackled behind her stepmother, throwing shadows across the mud-stained walls of the hut. Marta's eyes blazed like coals. Around them, villagers gathered in the rain, whispering, pointing, clutching their children as if Ilara were some kind of curse come to life. At 16, Ilara's thin frame looked even smaller beneath the oversized dress she wore, patched torn damp from the storm outside. Her hands clutched the frayed bag that held the last of her belongings. A cloth wrapper, a wooden spoon, nothing more. "Witch girl," someone muttered from the crowd. "She sees things in her sleep," another hissed. "Better she leaves before she brings more death." Ilara's lips trembled, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that defending herself only made the jeers louder. Instead, she bent, picked up her sack, and stepped into the night. The door slammed behind her with a thud that echoed in her chest. The rain greeted her instantly, soaking through the fabric, clinging to her bones. She stumbled toward the village square, lit only by smoking torches. Every step felt heavier than the last, the mud sucking at her bare feet, as if the earth itself wanted to keep her down. She stopped beneath a giant baobab tree, its branches swaying against the storm. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating her for a heartbeat, then soaked, abandoned. For a moment she pressed her forehead against the rough bark, listening to her own heartbeat drum in her ears. Silence followed, broken only by distant murmurs of villagers dispersing. The accusations still rang inside her head. Witch curse, danger. But behind the fear, there was something else, faint but insistent. A vision she had seen just the night before. A man in a black suit, grief carved into his face. Beside him, a girl in a wheelchair, pale but alive. And Ilara herself standing before them, saying words she didn't fully understand. "I can make her walk." She squeezed her eyes shut. Was it madness or was it destiny? The rain slowed, turning into a mist that clung to her skin. Ilara sank down against the tree trunk, hugging her knees tight. She had no food, no shelter, no family. Yet somewhere beyond the storm, beyond this village that had cast her aside, the image of that grieving man and his silent daughter pulled at her heart like a rope. Her breath came ragged, her mind torn between despair and an unexplainable certainty. She didn't know his name, didn't know where to find him. But she knew this, her story was not ending here in the mud. The storm clouds parted slightly, revealing a sliver of moonlight. Ilara lifted her face toward it. Her body was shivering, but her eyes no longer looked defeated. Somewhere in a world far different from her own, her path was waiting. And as the night swallowed the last torchlight of the village, she whispered to herself, steady this time, almost like a vow. Something is coming, and I must be ready. Far away from the dripping roofs of Ashmere, the skyline of Brighton Hills glowed like fireflies scattered across glass towers. In the penthouse of a mansion that stretched wider than Ilara's entire village, Alexander Crow sat in silence. His breakfast table gleamed with imported silverware pastries, stacked high fruits flown in from the Mediterranean. Yet his appetite was gone. Across from him, Isabella fiddled with the edge of her napkin. 17 years old, her face delicate as porcelain, her eyes too calm for someone so young. Her wheelchair, crafted in Italy, rolled almost silently across the marble floor. "Dad," she said softly, breaking the silence. "You don't have to keep trying so hard." Alexander's fork froze mid-air. "I'm not trying. I'm just," he stopped. The words didn't come. How could he tell her that every machine in the gym, every doctor's report, every sleepless night was for her? How could he admit he was running out of hope? The room felt colder despite the sunlight pouring through the glass walls. He had flown experts from New York, Berlin, Tokyo, neurologists, therapists, specialists of every kind. Each one had shaken their head in the end. Her muscles respond. Her nerves are intact. But she will never walk. Never. The words still echoed in his ears. Meanwhile, in Ashmere, life was measured in chores and scorn. Ilaris mornings began before sunrise, pounding cassava, fetching water, washing clothes until her fingers cracked. Marta's voice cut sharper than the whip of the wind. "Work faster, girl. You want to eat today, don't you?" Ilara never answered. Silence was safer. The less she spoke, the fewer slaps she earned. She moved like a shadow inside her own home, her thin body bent over endless tasks, her hair clinging to her damp forehead. Yet beneath the drudgery, something set her apart. People whispered of their strange gift. The feverish child who suddenly cooled after sipping the herbs she prepared. The old woman whose chest pain eased when Ilara pressed crushed leaves against her skin. To some it was a blessing. To others, a danger. "She sees too much," one villager muttered. "She walks between worlds," another said. And in a place where fear ruled louder than gratitude, difference became a crime. Back in Brighton Hills, Alexander stood in the grand gym, his hands clenched on the treadmill rail. Isabella sat nearby, watching him with a small smile. "You don't have to do this," she told him. "I just want to believe there's something left I can try," he whispered. But belief was slipping through his fingers. On that same evening, Ilara sat outside the hut, gazing at the horizon. The sky burned orange, then sank into purple. She hadn't eaten. Marta claimed there wasn't enough yam. Hunger gnawed at her, but what lingered stronger was the vision. The man in the suit. The girl in the chair. Her own voice saying, "I can make her walk." She shivered. Was it madness? Or a command she couldn't ignore? Inside, Marta's laughter rang sharp when Ilara spoke of her dream. "So now you want to charm rich men with your nonsense. You'll end up buried beside your mother if you keep talking like that." The slap came quick. Ilara turned her face away. She said nothing more. But deep inside, she knew her life had just tilted toward something larger than this hut, this village, this endless cycle of fear. Two worlds. One in glittering silence, drowning in wealth but starving for hope. One in mud and rejection, carrying a gift mistaken for a curse. Neither knew it yet, but their paths were already bending toward each other. And soon both worlds would collide, with consequences no one could ignore. That collision would not come gently. For Ilara, the accusations were about to escalate. For Alexander, despair was about to sharpen into something worse. The whispers in Ashmere didn't fade. They grew louder, heavier, like a drumbeat Ilara couldn't escape. When the village chief collapsed in his compound, clutching his chest, people ran in panic. No warning, no illness before. By morning, he was gone. And by noon, the pointing fingers had already found her. "She said it last week," someone shouted. She warned it would happen. She must have called it down herself. By dusk, the crowd outside Marta's hut swelled like a storm. Torches flickered, voices sharpened. "Bring her out, she doesn't belong here." Marta didn't hesitate. She dragged Ilara to the doorway, thrust a torn sack into her arms and hissed, "Oh, if you stay, they'll take me too." The door slammed shut. The voices swallowed her. Ilara didn't fight. She simply walked her head down past the faces twisted with fear and suspicion. Every step felt like a nail sealing her exile. That night, she lay against the back wall of the market, the ground-cold mosquitoes buzzing around her bare ankles. She hadn't eaten, hadn't cried. She only saw the vision again, the man in the black suit, his face streaked with grief, the girl beside him motionless in her chair. and her own voice clear and unshaken, I can make her walk. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It felt like a call. Across the ocean of difference in Brighton Hills, Alexander's silence grew heavier by the day. He stood in his office surrounded by files, medical reports stacked like monuments to failure. Scans, charts, endless papers all saying the same thing, no cure. His lawyer leaned across the polished desk. Sir, forgive me, but maybe it's time to accept she may never walk. Alexander's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. He only looked toward the window where Isabella sat by the glass, staring out at the city lights. She's not just my daughter, he muttered. She's all I have. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, then left. Alone, Alexander pressed his hands against the reports until the edges cut into his palms. Millions spent, every expert consulted, every prayer whispered. Nothing. His empire could bend markets, but not fate. Back in Ashmere, Ilara's hunger grew sharper than pain. She begged at a roadside stall for scraps of food, but the vendor snatched the tray away. Go! The woman barked. You'll scare away my customers. Ilara didn't argue. She moved on her body weak, but her spirit pulled forward by something she couldn't name. She passed a group of girls in school uniforms. One pointed. That's her. They said she cursed the chief. The others gasped, hurried away, as if her shadow itself were dangerous. The words didn't sting anymore. What hurt more was the loneliness. Yet even in that loneliness, the visions came again, sharper, brighter. This time she saw the man kneeling, begging her not to leave. She saw the girl rising to her feet. Ilara woke with her hands trembling. She whispered into the darkness, it's not madness, it's direction. And so while Alexander sank deeper into despair, and Ilara drifted farther from everything she once called home, their worlds were drawing closer. Neither of them knew that the collision was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. And when it came, it wouldn't be quiet. It would arrive like a whisper that defied reason, like a spark that refused to die. By the time Ilara reached the city gates, her body was running only on stubborn faith. She had walked for hours, clinging to scraps of water. Her feet blistered her dress, torn at the hem. Brighton Hills was nothing like Ashmere. Towers of glass clawed at the sky. Cars roared past like beasts of steel. People brushed by her without a glance, their perfumes and briefcases far removed from her world. She drifted toward a children's park where laughter filled the air. Her stomach ached as she watched families eat ice cream balloons bobbing in the wind. She was about to turn away when she saw him, the man from her vision. A tall figure in a black suit, shoulders heavy with sorrow. Beside him sat the girl in the chair. Isabella, her pale hands resting on the armrests, her eyes distant but kind. Ilara froze. Her breath caught. The vision was real. She nearly turned back, ashamed of her ragged clothes, but hunger and destiny forced her forward. Her steps faltered when Alexander noticed her. His expression softened just slightly. Without hesitation, he reached into his car and pulled out a wrapped food pack and a folded bill. Take this, he said. Eat something. Ilara's fingers shook as she accepted it. For a moment, she wanted to disappear with the gift, but the voice inside her screamed louder. Say it. Say it now. She lifted her head. Her voice came steadier than she expected. Sir Alexander paused, the car door half open. I can make your daughter walk. The words sliced the air between them. The driver scoffed, muttering under his breath. A guard shifted closer, ready to push her away. But Alexander raised his hand, his eyes locked on hers. What did you just say? Ilara took a step forward, clutching the bag of food to her chest. I saw you, she said simply. I saw her. In my sleep. I was meant to meet you here. The silence grew tense. A few passers-by slowed, curious. Isabella tilted her head, studying the girl's face. "Daddy," she whispered. "She looks familiar." Alexander turned sharply. "Familiar? I think she was in my dream, too." His pulse quickened. Last night, Isabella had spoken of a girl who told her to stand to walk. He had dismissed it as wishful thinking. But now here she was, flesh and bone, staring at him with unwavering eyes. The driver leaned closer. "Sir, please. This is the city. Anyone can spin stories for money." But Alara's voice cut through. "If I wanted money, I would have walked away with what you gave me. I don't want your wealth. I don't want your house. I only ask one thing. Let me try." For the first time in years, Alexander hesitated. His world was built on contracts, data proof. And yet something about this barefoot stranger stirred a quiet hope he thought he had buried. He turned to Isabella. "What do you think?" The girl's voice was soft but firm. "Please, Dad. Let her try." The guards tensed. The doctor on call frowned. But Alexander finally exhaled. "You'll come with us," he said slowly. "But you'll be searched. Watched. Every step." Alara nodded. "You can chain me if you want. I have nothing to hide." And just like that, the gates of the Crow Mansion opened to a girl the world had thrown away. But bringing her in was only the beginning. Because what Alara pointed out next, hidden in the very soil of the garden, would shatter everything the crows thought they knew about science, fate, and faith itself. The ride to the Crow Mansion was silent. Guards sat stiff eyes fixed on Alara in the back seat. Isabella stared at her with quiet curiosity, while Alexander's gaze flicked to the rearview mirror every few seconds, torn between doubt and a strange sense of inevitability. The car rolled through iron gates into a world Alara had never seen, marble walls gleaming under spotlights, manicured lawns, fountains taller than houses. Servants lined the driveway, whispering as the barefoot girl stepped out. The guards searched her bag. Only a tattered cloth and a cracked notebook. Nothing else. "She's clean, sir," one muttered. Alexander turned to her, his voice sharp but measured. "You said the answer is in my garden. Show me." Alara nodded. She walked slowly across the lawn, ignoring the suspicious glances, her bare feet brushing dew-soaked grass. She stopped near a corner where most gardeners had long ignored a low shrub. She knelt, pressed her hand against the soil, then pulled gently until a thick, reddish root came free. "This," she said quietly, holding it up. Alexander frowned. "A root. It grows only in rare places," she explained. "It strengthens what science calls dead. But it must be prepared the right way." The family doctor stepped forward, his face incredulous. "Sir, with respect, this is nonsense. Herbs cannot repair what medicine has deemed impossible. It could be toxic." Alara broke a piece off and chewed it calmly. She swallowed, then lifted her chin. "If it were poison, I'd already be dead." The room fell into stunned silence. Isabella wheeled closer, sniffing the root curiously. "It smells strong." Alexander's hands trembled. "You want me to give this to my daughter?" "Only if you believe," Alara replied. The kitchen became the battleground. Stainless pots hissed as Alara boiled the root, the earthy aroma filling the marble room. Guards stood tense at every doorway, the doctor pacing furiously. "This is madness," he muttered. "She could go into shock. Her organs could fail. She already tasted it," Isabella interrupted softly. "And she's fine." "That proves nothing." the doctor snapped. Alexander stood in silence, his eyes fixed on the bubbling pot. He had spent years chasing every expert, and now hope stood barefoot in his kitchen stirring a root no textbook had ever named. Daddy, Isabella whispered, what if this is what we've been waiting for? His heart clenched. And if it isn't, then at least well know we tried everything. The words broke him. Ilara poured the thick brown liquid into a glass. She placed it gently before Isabella. Half now, half before bed. The guards glanced at Alexander. The doctor shook his head furiously. Sir, I beg you. But Isabella reached out first. She lifted the glass with steady hands, sipped, then finished half in one motion. Nothing happened. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. The room held its breath. Isabella only yawned, rubbing her eyes. I feel sleepy, she murmured. Panic surged through Alexander. Are you dizzy, heart racing? Tell me no, she said softly. Just tired. The doctor checked her pulse. Normal. No sign of distress. She's stable. Alexander exhaled shakily and carried her to her room himself, tucking her in as though she were a child again. He watched her until her breathing steadied. When he returned, Ilara sat calmly, hands folded in her lap. Where did you learn this? He demanded. I didn't, she said. It comes, his voice dropped. People have called you names, haven't they? She smiled faintly. Many times. He stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, Tonight I trusted a stranger barefoot in my home more than every doctor I've ever known. That she replied gently is what faith feels like. The mansion did not sleep. Guards checked Isabella's pulse every hour. Alexander paced like a man awaiting a verdict. At dawn, Isabella stirred. She mumbled through her dreams, Stop pushing me. Let me stand. Alexander froze by her bedside. His throat tightened. By the second day, her legs grew warm. She whispered, They feel different. Hope flickered. The staff stopped whispering. Even the doctor, though still skeptical, admitted there was no sign of harm. By the fourth morning, everything changed. It was 7:42 a.m. Isabella's nurse cried out, Sir Combe, quick! Alexander rushed down the hallway. He stopped dead at the doorway. Isabella was standing. Shaky barefoot, her knees trembling, but standing. Her eyes filled with tears. Daddy, I can walk. For a moment he couldn't move. His hands covered his face as he broke sobbing, openly collapsing to his knees. My God, my God. He pulled her into his arms, kissed her cheeks 100 times. She laughed through her tears. I don't know how, but I can. The mansion erupted. Guards shouted. Maids wept. Even the doctor fell into a chair, whispering, This isn't science. Outside in the garden, Ilara sat quietly by the fountain, eyes lifted to the sky. She didn't need to see it. She already knew. 3 days later, the world knew too. Flashes from cameras filled a grand conference hall. Journalists, doctors, business leaders, all gathered to hear what no one believed possible. Alexander Crowe stood at the podium, his daughter beside him walking without aid. At his other side, Ilara stood in a borrowed dress, still barefoot, still calm. For 17 years, Alexander began, his voice breaking. I searched the world for a cure. I paid every specialist, every hospital. Nothing worked. But then he turned, placing a hand gently on Ilara's shoulder. I gave food to a girl no one wanted, and she gave me back my daughter. Cameras flashed wildly. Gasps filled the room. Her name is Alara. She is not a curse. She is not a fraud. She is a gift. He stepped aside. Alara walked to the microphone. She looked down for a moment, then raised her chin. Most of you don't know me. Many won't believe this. That's fine. I've lived most of my life being doubted. I didn't go to school. I didn't grow up in mansions. All I know is when people came to me sick, sometimes, somehow they left better. And for that I was called names. The hall went silent. They drove me from my village. I begged for food. I slept in markets. No one wanted to touch me. But this man believed enough to feed me when I was starving. And his kindness was the beginning of everything. Her voice steadied her gaze, locking on the cameras. So to anyone who's ever been rejected, abandoned, or labeled, you are not a curse. You are not invisible. Your voice matters. The hall erupted into applause. Isabella rushed forward, hugging Alara tightly. Reporters captured the moment, the image already destined to circle the globe. That night, as the city buzzed with headlines and debates, Alexander found Alara on the rooftop terrace staring at the stars. He stood beside her, quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, "I offered millions to doctors and got nothing. You asked for nothing and gave me everything. How do I thank you?" Alara smiled softly. "Tell the truth. That's all I want." And in that moment, under the silver glow of the moon, the truth was brighter than any spotlight. But the miracle was only the beginning. What followed would reshape reputations, families, and futures in ways none of them had yet imagined. The headlines spread faster than wildfire. Billionaire's daughter walks again. Miracle or mystery? The girl named Alara. From talk shows to radio stations, her name filled every conversation. Some called it faith, others a medical anomaly. But one truth was undeniable. Isabella Crowe had walked, and the girl the world once mocked had become the center of hope. In Ashmere, the same villagers who once hurled whispers now gathered around radios and television screens borrowed from neighbors. Their jaws dropped as they saw Alara no longer in rags, standing beneath chandeliers beside Alexander and Isabella. "That's her," someone whispered. "The girl we drove out." "I always knew she was different," another muttered quickly, trying to rewrite memory. But the truth lingered heavier than smoke. Their shame was louder than their excuses. And Marta, the stepmother, who once pushed Alara into the rain, now sat on her porch alone. No gossiping neighbors, no friendly chatter. Only silence, the kind that gnawed at the bones. For the first time, her voice carried no power. Back in Brighton Hills, change began to take shape. Alexander kept his word. Within weeks, a press release announced the Alara Foundation, dedicated to supporting children labeled as different children who carried gifts or conditions the world did not understand. No child, Alexander said at the launch, should ever be abandoned for what makes them unique. Alara herself moved into a modest apartment near the Foundation's first learning center. She enrolled in classes reading writing subjects she had never touched before. At first, the books felt like puzzles too complex to solve. But each night, she tried. And each morning, she grew a little stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. Isabella visited often. She and Alara spent afternoons in the garden, walking side by side, their laughter echoing against marble walls. To the world, they were miracle and witness. To each other, they were sisters bound not by blood, but by belief. Yet Alara asked for nothing else. When Alexander tried again, "Tell me what you want, a house, a car, anything," she shook her head. "I want my name back," she said quietly. "I want the world to know I wasn't what they called me." Alexander nodded, his voice firm. then that is exactly what the world will know. And he kept that promise. Weeks passed, and the ripples continued. At the village market where Alara once begged for scraps, strangers now spoke her name with reverence. Did you hear? She healed a billionaire's daughter. Farmers nodded, traders leaned closer, and children listened wide-eyed. Marta still sat alone, bitterness turning into silence. Shame is always loudest in those who once shouted lies. But Alara didn't return to punish them. She didn't need to. The truth itself had already done the work. One afternoon during a quiet outing, a woman approached Alara carrying a small boy with a limp. She fell to her knees. Please, she begged. I heard what you did. Help him. Alara knelt gently before the child, her eyes kind, her smile calm. I'll try. Because she knew now her gift was not a curse, it was a calling. And so, from exile to acceptance, from whispers of fear to echoes of faith, Alara's story was no longer just her own. It was a seed planted in countless hearts. And soon the world would see not just a girl who healed, but a symbol of what kindness and truth could become. The stage lights dimmed until only one spotlight remained. It fell on Alara. She stood at the center of the hall, a pale blue dress flowing gently around her ankles, her hair pulled back simply. On one side stood Alexander, proud but humbled. On the other, Isabellano chair, no crutches, only steady legs, and a smile that glowed brighter than the chandeliers above. The room hushed. Cameras clicked. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Alara stepped forward. Her voice, though quiet, carried like a bell. I was once called a curse, she said. I was cast out, forgotten. But today I stand here not as what others named me, but as who I truly am. She turned her gaze, sweeping the room, then rising to meet the lenses of 100 cameras. To anyone who has ever been silenced, abandoned, or misjudged, this moment is for you. You are not invisible. You are not a mistake. And you are never beyond the reach of hope. For a second, no one moved. Then the audience rose in unison. Applause thundered, some weeping, some cheering, the hall shaking with the sound. Isabella walked forward, took Alara's hand and lifted it high. The cameras flashed, freezing the image forever. Two girls once worlds apart, now united as a living symbol of faith, kindness, and truth. Later that night, when the noise faded and the city lights glittered beyond the terrace, Alara stood beneath the open sky. A cool breeze brushed her face, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden below. She whispered to herself, not for the cameras, not for the world, just for her own heart. I am not a curse. I am remembered. The moon hung above her like a silver crown. For the first time in her life, she did not feel small beneath it. She felt seen. And so her story became more than survival. It became a reminder that justice does not always roar, it sometimes whispers through the quiet faith of a forgotten girl. That dignity is not given by wealth or titles, but by holding fast to the truth of who you are. That kindness, even in its simplest form, has the power to spark miracles. Alara's journey began with rejection, but it ended with recognition. And though the road ahead was still long, one truth now stood unshakable. The world often fears what it cannot explain. But truth once revealed silences every lie. And somewhere in homes across the world, those watching carried that message with them. Some with tears, some with hope, but all with the same lingering thought. If a girl in rags could walk into a mansion and change everything, then maybe, just maybe, the impossible wasn't so impossible after all. The end. But also the beginning. Sometimes life places labels on us that are heavier than chains, curse, burden, failure. But Alaris' journey reminds us that no name given in fear can erase the truth of who we are. When kindness meets courage, even the impossible can bow. Her story is not just about walking again. It is about rising above silence, confronting prejudice, and proving that dignity is not granted by society, but carried within. As the saying goes, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. We all hold a power the world cannot take away, the power to believe in our worth and to see the unseen value in others. What part of Alaris' story touched you most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Give this video a like and subscribe for more powerful stories that stir both heart and mind. Wishing you peace, hope, and strength in your own journey.